Locking people away in the United States is big business, and that's the topic of today's No Filter. Recently, there was a report by something known as In the Public Interest, and what they wanted to tell Americans about is that oftentimes when you see these for-profit prisons in these states, first of all, they're not really private. They're paid by the taxpayers, and in their contracts with the states that they operate in, they have something known as inmate quotas. Inmate quotas specify that they need to have a certain percentage of beds full in their facilities in order to carry out the contract with the state. Now, the crazy thing about this is oftentimes those inmate quotas can be up to 90 to 100%. And if the state fails to fill those beds, that means that the taxpayers have to still pay for those empty beds within the facility, almost as if there was some ghost inmate laying in there. Now, there's a really big problem with that because, of course, it's not really saving states money, and to top it off, it's actually giving people, politicians specifically, an incentive to keep pushing tough-on-crime legislation and tough-on-crime laws. Now, I want to read you guys some of the statistics that they found in this report. It turns out that there are 3 privately run prisons in Arizona that have contracts that require 100% inmate occupancy, so the state is obligated to keep its prisons filled to capacity. Otherwise, it has to pay the private company for any unused beds. So in Arizona alone, there are 3 for-profit prisons. And of course, for those of you who are unaware who the big players are in this story, you have Corrections Corporation of America, and you also have GEO Group. Some more interesting information from the report indicates that Arizona, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Virginia are locked in contracts with the highest occupancy guarantee requirements, with all quotas requiring between 95 and 100% occupancy. And it just continues and it gets worse. Though crime has dropped by 1/3 in the past decade, an occupancy requirement covering 3 for-profit prisons has forced taxpayers in Colorado to pay an additional $2 million. This is taxpayer money that is being used to lock Americans up. And let me just say one thing. I think that there's a huge misconception when it comes to the people that are serving time in these facilities. Oftentimes people think that they deserve to be behind bars. But the reality is, a lot of times they are undocumented immigrants that should probably be deported instead of arrested and detained in the country for a few years before they get deported. Or in a lot of cases, they're nonviolent drug offenders. So we're wasting our resources to make these so-called private companies tremendously wealthy. Now, I was really upset to find that in California, this is becoming an increasingly hideous problem. California has a big problem when it comes to overpopulation in our prisons. So as a result, Governor Jerry Brown has decided, instead of following a court order that indicates that he needs to release some inmates, he has decided to transfer them to a for-profit prison. So just to give you some numbers on that, California has already reduced the prison population by about 46,000 inmates. However, the court order that Jerry Brown received indicates that he needs to release another 9,600 inmates. Instead of allowing them to go free, he has decided to sign a 5-year contract with a for-profit prison company so he can transfer those inmates to the for-profit prison, essentially spending taxpayer money to make those companies wealthy and to ensure that these people don't get released early, even though the vast majority of them haven't committed any real violent crime and are no threat to society. And I should really clarify that. I think that there's a lot of fear-mongering when it comes to some of these inmates, and we are the number 1 country when it comes to locking people away. We lock away more people than any other industrialized country on this planet. And that is a real problem because you incentivize locking people away. These companies make money off of it. And for those of you who wonder where these for-profit prisons even came from in the first place, in the 1980s, when the Reagan administration was very, very harsh on people that got caught with drugs, all of a sudden, our prison population shot up. We didn't know what to do with them. It was over capacity. So all of a sudden, GEO Group and CCA realized, hey, there are profits to be made by locking up these nonviolent drug offenders. So the for-profit prisons started popping up all over the place. And now all of a sudden, we have this system that keeps pushing this war on drugs and keeps pushing the criminalization of activity that people should get rehabilitated for, not locked away for. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed my No Filter today, and I will see you next week. Welcome to The Point. We have an excellent show for you guys today, and we have an even better panel. And before we get to that, I want to tell you guys who we are going to talk with and what we're going to talk about. So first of all, we're going to talk about journalism. How do you identify a journalist, and does it even make sense to try to find a definition for a journalist? We're also going to talk about possible diplomacy with Iran, and also, is Pope Francis liberal? We might get into a little bit of a debate with that. One of the panelists has already told me that he's ready to fight. So with that said, let's go ahead and meet our panelists. We have Axel Caballero. He is the founder and director of Cuentame, a nonprofit campaigning media organization for the Latino community. Axel is also part of the Brave New Foundation team and runs the Spanish language blog metaforapolitica.com. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on again.
Ramon Galindo is the fighter of today's panel, at least that's what he said in the beginning. He is the West Coast correspondent for RT America and unquestionably a tenacious journalist covering issues ranging from military affairs and U.S. foreign policy to the prison industrial complex and domestic spying. I talked about the prison industrial complex today a little bit for my No Filter segment. I love the reporting you do on that, so thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
And last but certainly not least, we have Dave Rubin. He is a comedian, regular fill-in co-host on The Young Turks, and star of the Rubin Report on TYT Network, which you should all watch as soon as you finish watching The Point.
Absolutely.
But not before. Not before you're watching The Point. Thank you for joining us, Dave. We're going to start off with our discussion on journalism. So recently, the Senate Judiciary Committee decided that they were going to take up the topic of journalism and how you define what a real journalist is. Senator Dianne Feinstein was really taking the lead on this, and she had some really interesting and, in my opinion, scary things to say. So let's take a look.
I've had long-standing concerns that the language in the bill as introduced would grant a special privilege to people who really aren't reporters at all, who have no professional qualifications whatsoever. The fundamental issue behind this amendment is, should this privilege apply to anyone, to a 17-year-old who drops out of high school, buys a website for $5, and starts a blog? Or should it apply to journalists, to reporters who have bona fide credentials? This bill is described as a reporter shield bill, so I believe it should be applied to real reporters. So this amendment effectively sets up a test for establishing bona fide credentials.
So as you guys could hear, she's specifically referring to shield laws and who shield laws should protect. So if you are a journalist and you have a particular source that is giving you leaked information, if you are a so-called established, well-known journalist, well, you might be protected under shield laws. But if you happen to be a muckraker, someone who actually reports on things that might go against government authority, well, then all of a sudden you might not be protected under shield laws. And remember, there's a huge distinction between traditional media and new media. People who work in new media are not necessarily considered journalists by the establishment. So that's why this is very problematic. Having officials determine what a journalist is and telling us who can report certain things without worrying about prosecution is very problematic, at least in my eyes. However, we should have a broader discussion about what it means to be a journalist, because there might be varying opinions on that. So I want to start off with you, Axel. What were your thoughts on what Feinstein said there, and what are the ramifications of the Senate Judiciary Committee defining what journalism is?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think I agree with you with what you say. I don't think the government should be defining what a journalist is. I mean, I think what we need to do is start defining what public officials are and what their role is. And so maybe that's the approach that we take, particularly with Senator Feinstein, because I think this is a very, very dangerous point. She's talking about 17-year-old bloggers and white supremacists as you know, the danger of, but we already have Fox News Network there, you know, so. I mean, to a certain extent, like the more that we talk about what becomes journalism and what doesn't, it allows for voices to be suppressed. And I think that that's a very dangerous approach with this type of law.
Ramon, what do you think about the suppression of different voices within the media? I mean, I think that it's very, very curious that the Senate Judiciary Committee is trying to tackle this issue now, especially given cases like WikiLeaks, given cases like Bradley Manning, given cases like Edward Snowden. All of a sudden, these politicians are like, hey, what? No, we just want to have a fair discussion about what a journalist is. I mean, do you really see this as something that's sincere and genuine, or do you see this as something that is a little Orwellian?
Well, it's very obvious that the Obama administration has gone very aggressively against people who leak things that are inconvenient to the government, excuse me. So really, I see this more as a way to cover themselves and perhaps access this information that these journalists are obtaining more easily. That's why it's difficult to take this version of the Media Shield Law, which is being proposed, very seriously, because there are so many exceptions to it. And one of the biggest exceptions is this very vague notion that information might hurt national security. That has been used over and over and over, yet never has been proven. And that's what's going on right now with this Jay Risen case, where he's being subpoenaed, and now a federal judge says that he doesn't have those First Amendment protections. So in that case, and in the AP case, this sort of press protection legislation that politicians are trying to come up with, it doesn't really affect the journalists that are being affected the most by this government intrusion.
Let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a journalist. Now, Dave, you are a big tweeter. You love to be on Twitter, and you have really, really great information that you share with people who like to follow you. Now, on the other hand, you're also a host, and you cover news, so I would consider you a journalist. But let's say you take that out of the equation, and you're just doing what you're doing on Twitter. Do you feel that you would deserve the same shield laws as someone who works at CNN or MSNBC?
Right. So first, just to the broader point for a second, I mean, of course, the government that nobody trusts anymore, because it's proven itself to be untrustworthy, is protecting the very journalists that protect them all the time. So that shouldn't surprise any of us. But to that point specifically, should Twitter be protected like everything else? I mean, I don't think just anyone that signs up for Twitter is necessarily a journalist, but generally speaking, I would give the broadest possible explanation for who's a journalist. It has so been proven that the media is failing us and not attacking power properly, and that's why a place like the Young Turks exists, and shows like this and shows like mine exist, because the mainstream media has failed us. So, look, it wouldn't be too many steps for Feinstein to say, well, you know what, an online news network doesn't deserve the same coverage that a cable news network deserves. And then where would all the truth that we try to bring go? It would be out the window pretty quickly.
I mean, she's already said that she doesn't believe a blogger is considered a journalist. And what does that mean? A blogger to me is someone who wants to write about the news and maybe analyze the news, but unfortunately hasn't found a job in traditional or establishment media, or doesn't want a job in traditional or establishment media, because we know what the reality is. Establishment media has to deal with corporate sponsors. They have to deal with censorship. So members of the new media, or members that focus more on digital media, have more freedom. They get to write about what they want to write about. They get to say what they want to say, which is what you see here at the Young Turks. So saying that you don't believe that bloggers are considered journalists is very, very dangerous. And another thing that I want to point out about Twitter specifically is I remember when State Senator Wendy Davis in Texas was doing her epic filibuster against anti-abortion legislation in Texas. You want to know how many mainstream media outlets were covering that? Zero. People literally took to Twitter to get live updates on what was happening on that situation. And it was because you had citizen journalists informing others. Those are people that should be protected under these shield laws. So to have someone like Feinstein say, no, those aren't journalists, is very, very dangerous. And I'm 100% against it.
Absolutely. The landscape and the outlets have changed. And apparently she's still stuck back in TV, where there's 13 channels and you still dial the TV to get your news, because that's the only way that you can understand her perception of what a journalism is and what information is. Journalism is about service. It's about providing a service, no matter how it comes. There are responsibilities with that, of course. Any time that you put information out there, you might as well check, if you're right about it, even though it's an opinion or not. But that doesn't disqualify people from being journalists or not. I think that danger, as she pointed out, is tremendous.
And just 10, 15 years ago, you're talking about kind of what journalism used to look like. 10, 15 years ago, we had no idea the impact that bloggers were going to have politically, many times doing a lot more hard-hitting pieces than even I would. And I've been to journalism school, and I've been working for TV networks for 10 years. So in this day and age, the way that technology is changing and the way that the economics of the news business are changing, pretty much anyone with a phone camera could be considered a journalist. I mean, we constantly see TV stations asking viewers, send us your photos, because they're reducing their photographer staffs. We see newspapers laying off their entire photography staffs, completely relying on citizen reporters. Even CNN has their iReport. So when we move forward and create these laws, we have to know that the journalism of the future is going to look much different.
Yeah, the iReport's actually a great example, because when something happens, there's a hurricane somewhere, there's a terrorist attack somewhere, immediately help us out with the iReport. Well, because there are people on the ground that are actually doing the reporting. But going to Feinstein, this is purely about access. She knows if she protects the reporters that work for cable news and the mainstream outlets, that they won't ask her the questions she doesn't want to be asked.
Absolutely.
But you can't control all the bloggers. You can't control all the people on Twitter. So she has no vested interest in protecting them, because those are the ones that are going to actually ask her the questions.
And furthermore, you actually give the power to both government and corporations to define what this industry is all about, to define what the service is all about. And that's just wrong in so many levels. You know, that squashes voices. The internet has become more democratic, and there's more voices that speak out on multiple levels. And the minute that you try to put these voices in buckets, you're completely diminishing exactly what this is all about.
Yeah, it's especially concerning that Dianne Feinstein or any politician would try to define the profession of a journalist, especially since it is really the only profession which is protected in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, definitely. And I see journalists as a balance of power within our political system. And if you get rid of that balance of power, I think that disastrous things can happen. I mean, fortunately, we have new media to mitigate the establishment media at this point. And seeing politicians trying to stomp on that is really scary stuff. Now, do you guys think that there are limits to who is or who can become a journalist? I mean, is it fair to say that anyone with a Twitter account can start tweeting anything and say, yeah, I'm a journalist? So definitely, I deserve the same rights.
I think maybe it has to do with just maybe we're focusing on the word journalist too much, because that somehow implies that you went to school for journalism or you got some sort of degree for journalism. I didn't go to school for journalism. I went to school for political science, so that's kind of close, but not really. Yet I do consider myself a journalist now, just by a function of what I do. So I don't think we should get too hung up on the word, as much as if you're someone that's trying to be part of a legitimate discourse and ask the right questions and all that, then you should be protected as much as someone else that's already protected just because they work for the right people.
You might disagree of what people post. You might disagree on what they tweet about. You might disagree on what they blog about. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the right to say what they have to say. You know, and I think that that's important. Part of journalism is a responsibility. It's a service based on responsibility. And so, you know, if you call, there's many voices out there. There's millions and millions of Twitter users, billions now in the world. So not everyone is going to be taken seriously, because not everyone has something serious to say. But those that really are doing their job and they're being very responsible, you know, are being taken seriously. And I think that that's how we define what that responsibility is all about.
Yeah, and this, and you bring up a good point, Dave, of, you know, focusing more on the actual process of journalism and collecting this information and presenting it to your viewers, whoever it is. I mean, there's this debate even within journalistic circles. The Society of Professional Journalism recently voted on a resolution whether to change their name from professional journalist to professional journalism, because even in that institution, there are authors, there are PR people, there are documentarians who don't traditionally work every day as a journalist, but from time to time they put out hard-hitting and really vital information that the public needs to disseminate and really needs, you know, would they not be protected by shield laws like this? So that's why it is really troubling to kind of try to define it in such narrow terms.
Also, just in terms of Twitter specifically, you know, anyone that I follow that's a mainstream news reporter, I never feel like I'm getting truth from them, really. They're telling me a certain set of facts about something, but all the people that I truly respect on Twitter, actually most of them are comedians, because you're getting some sort of angle on the truth that's usually a little bit closer, and truth is best told funny. Or there's, you know, some other people that are on the fringes of politics that I think are truthful. The news people or the news organizations, if you look at CNN's Twitter feed, you're not getting a lot of truth, you're just getting a certain set of facts that they're okay with. And these guys all want to go, you know, it's like the White House Correspondents' Dinner. These guys all want to go to the parties with the politicians. So you're not going to talk shit about a guy if at the same time you're trying to get invited back to the party.
Yeah, there's this obsession with access. There's this obsession of being part of that bubble. I do want to close this conversation by talking about ethics a little bit, because I think that one thing that differentiates a good journalist from a bad journalist is one who actually believes and follows certain ethics. And I want to get, I mean, there are no wrong or right answers, but I want to get your thoughts on what appropriate journalistic ethics are. I'll start with you, Axel.
Well, ethics is not getting a PR press release and reporting on it, and then the rest echo chamber reports the same way and delivers the same talking points. That's not ethics. That's not reporting. That's not investigative reporting. And that's certainly, a brand of journalism that could or could not be taken seriously, but that's unethical in my point of view. So I think ethics is based on that service, on that responsibility of really getting to the truth and honesty and portraying it in an honest way without hiding stuff for other agendas and issues. As long as you're straightforward and your voice is straightforward, I think that's ethical.
Yeah, and I just take a couple of points from the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. A couple that I try to maintain on a daily basis is being a watchdog over government. Having this free press without so many restrictions is paramount to having a true democracy here in the U.S. And again, to not distort the facts and the truth. A lot of times, people will edit things for their own agendas, and that's called propaganda. As a journalist, you have to give people the proper context and not alter the information that you're giving them.
Yeah, I would say ethics basically are just being intellectually honest, which so few reporters are. Even someone like Wolf Blitzer, who's on CNN 28 hours a day, the guy could not ask a follow-up question if his life depended on it, because he has his paper in front of him with his set answers. So no matter what they say, he just goes to the next question. I know we're going to talk about Iran in a little bit, but Christiane Amanpour just sat down with Rouhani, and she asked him about the Holocaust, and he says, well, I'm not a historian. And then instead of her saying, well, it is a fact that it happened, that is a historical fact, you don't have to be a historian to know what a fact is and what history is, she immediately goes on to the next question, which in a way it almost validates what he's saying. You know what I mean? Like, he puts it out there, and then instead of any pushback, you're just letting it go. So I think honesty is ultimately what the most important thing related to integrity is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be fearless. Don't be afraid to lose the access. If you lose the access, it's not the end of the world. I think that actually speaks volumes as opposed to always getting that access whenever you want it. The one thing that I try to instill in the journalism students that I'm teaching now is don't try to follow this model that's been laid out for you and it's been used for decades. Create your own path and be fearless about it. All right, we got to take a quick break, so let's do that. And when we come back, we're going to talk about possible diplomacy with Iran. Welcome back to The Point. We're happy that you guys are back. And in this next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about Iran, and we're also going to talk about the Pope and how some people think that he might be liberal. But first, let's talk about foreign policy a little bit, a very, very hot topic on the show today. So it turns out that there could be possible diplomacy between the United States and Iran. If you guys could remember, just last year, there was a point where it almost seemed as though we were going to invade immediately. But then the attention kind of went to Syria, and now it's kind of back on Iran, especially since they have a new president, and that new president is Hassan Rouhani, and he seems to be a little more, how should I say it, I guess calm compared to Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad had no interest in any diplomatic relations with the United States, and that led to sanctions by the United States, and at that point Iran refused to stop with their nuclear program. However, Rouhani says that he wants to have a conversation. He wants to see if there is a possibility for diplomacy. However,
duplicity. You almost said duplicity.
However, he has not met with President Obama yet, but there will be a meeting with Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif, and we'll see how that will turn out. But at the moment being, I mean, keep in mind that there haven't been any real diplomatic conversations between the two countries since 1979. And so we've had a very tumultuous relationship, and who knows if the U.S. really trusts Iran or if Iran even trusts the U.S. And let's just start with that conversation. Ramon, is this a good sign? Is this the beginning of peace between the two countries?
Well, first of all, they probably still do not, the U.S. government and Iran still do not trust each other. That being said, the Obama administration has previously said that they would be looking forward to diplomatic relations with Iran. Just on the surface, this does look like a good sign, especially since you said that we haven't had diplomatic relations with them since the 1970s. And when it comes to U.S. interests, I mean, we want to have a friendly relationship with them, and we want them to have a friendly relationship with Israel. So not sure how attainable those goals are in the short term, but this does seem like a positive first step.
I see you itching over there, David.
Yeah. Well, on the point a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Syria, I kept saying this is all about Iran. This is all about Iran. And I still believe that. Syria, look, nothing changed really. We don't know if the chemical weapons are ever going to get out. It's kind of hard to move chemical weapons in the middle of a civil war and all that. And I think they just sort of tabled that. I think what's really going on here is they agreed to table that to really deal with this, because Iran is the real threat. If Iran had a nuke, it's a huge threat to all of Europe, obviously to the neighbors in the Middle East, and then it is a strategic threat to us. So the idea of the talking is pretty good, and these are all things that Obama promised. We're going to start talking. It's easier if you talk to enemies than don't talk to, you don't make peace with friends. That being said, I just don't, there's no basis for trust here, and I'm sure that they have no basis to trust us as well. And Obama tried to address that actually at the UN, saying they have grievances and we have grievances. So all of that rhetoric is kind of good. But then, you know what, they couldn't even get a handshake. Rouhani wouldn't show up to the lunch because they said wine was being served there, so he didn't want to show up to lunch. I mean, truly, that's what happened yesterday. So to me, this is still all talk, and for now, I guess it's okay. But if the centrifuges are still moving and all that's still happening, then there's far bigger problems on the horizon.
If Iran decides to continue on with its nuclear program, what do you think U.S. action should be? Do you feel that there needs to be U.S. intervention in Iran?
I was completely against the Syria war, so I'm happy that we didn't go to war, at least in the short term. We need some sort of credible threat. That's the other thing, is I don't know if we have a credible threat anymore, because they already ran through one red line. And I know running through a red line is sort of better than going to a war you don't want to be into, or a war that's unjustified. But we need a credible threat. Otherwise, there is no doubt that's what they're doing. The only people who say that's not what they're doing is them, and that's with good reason.
What do you think about that, Axel?
But I do think that there is a motivation for all of this, to put a likable character in the eyes of the world. And I think that it's based on the sanctions that have been levied upon Iran. And I think that there was a credible decision, because let's remember the president of Iran is still, it's still just a puppet to a certain extent. So I think that he's likable enough that he could start something that would resemble conversations. That I do think that economically, this is an economic decision from Iran. They are hurting. They're hurting economically, and they see sanctions as one of the main reasons why they're hurting. As long as we continue this path and sit down with every single player on the table, that should be our approach. That should continue to be our approach. What shouldn't be our approach is what Lindsey Graham is doing right now, which wants to introduce war resolution against Iran. That's crazy. That's just absolute nonsense. It hasn't worked before, is not going to work again.
Of course, and that's a symptom of the industrial military complex. We want to get in there. I mean, if the sanctions are already working and Iran is hurting, why would we invade? That's insane. Yeah. But I do want to ask Ramon the final question on this topic. I mean, what do you think about the United States, the same country that wants to give every single American an access to a gun, policing the entire world when it comes to nuclear weapons?
I mean, we have to remember, obviously, the tense relationship between the U.S. and Iran goes back to the Cold War, when they nationalized their oil, and then, things got worse back in the 70s. So it is quite hypocritical to say that we can have thousands of nuclear weapons while Iran can't have one. Yeah, I mean, and use drones. Obviously, any nuclear weapon by any country is quite dangerous, but given the fact that we have actually used them, it does strike a very hypocritical tone in the international community.
All right, David, do you want to make a closing statement?
Yeah, well, my only last thing on this, and I don't usually side on the government, but I think in this particular case, we're not actively threatening anyone with our nukes. There may be sort of a subtle threat in general that we have over the world, I suppose, which is why a lot of people are angry all the time. But there actually is a threat coming out of Iran that they're saying, well, they could, Ahmadinejad at least was saying, well, I could wipe Israel off the map. Now, Rouhani's not saying that, except he reports to a guy called the Supreme Leader. I mean, really, that's the part that we only addressed for a split second here, that he's really not even in charge. And I mean, just calling yourself the Supreme Leader, I mean, that in and of itself tells you something's not right with the power structure there. And it's hard for us to negotiate as a democracy with a theocracy, or even worse. I mean, it's almost a dictatorship.
It's important to keep in mind that Rouhani worked with the establishment in Iran for 3 decades. At the end of the day, let's say best case scenario, he is actually a relatively liberal president in Iran. at the end of the day, he's not the end all be all. He doesn't make the final decision, so that's a little problematic. But I mean, who knows what's going to end up happening with this? Ramon, you're itching to say something.
I just wanted to add that the Ayatollah has also changed his tone to say that he is against nuclear weapons. Again, you can take that.
Right, it's right. How do you know what's true, I guess, is the point. And they can say the same thing about us, so I totally grant them
And
that.
to be fair, there are many countries that make threats with their nuclear weapons. North Korea being one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been threats from Pakistan. That's the kind of stuff that we should also keep an eye on. But I just worry that our intentions in Iran go beyond just the threats that they've made, because I mean, keep in mind that they've nationalized their oil. The U.S. doesn't like that.
Yeah.
So there are issues with that as well. So there are other ulterior motives of the U.S. Just bringing that up there.
Absolutely, and you know the good part about this is that it's at least a small opening to say that diplomacy is about talking with people, and you don't pick and choose who you're going to talk to. And I think that that is already a slight departure from the Bush doctrine 5 years into the Obama presidency, which might be a good thing after all. But
all right, we got to move on to the second topic, so let's go ahead and do that. The newly minted Pope Francis has made some pretty interesting comments about gay marriage and about abortion. In fact, but of course, back during the last Pope, the Catholic Church was really emphasizing how they're against gay marriage and they're against abortion. But Pope Francis has said, look, these are small-minded rules. We should focus more on wealth inequality and helping the needy. Let's take a look.
In the surprisingly candid interview, Pope Francis says the Catholic Church should get over its obsession with moral issues like abortion, contraception, and homosexuality, and become more welcoming, including of groups like gays. Liberal Catholics welcome the message.
I think this Pope is sending messages that he wants to renew the Church, and I really agree with him. We cannot be anything other than happy with this Pope. Finally, we have a Pope who wants to renew things.
But few people think the Pope's openness actually means a change in church doctrine towards divorce or gay people, including priest and Spanish journalist Antonio Pelayo.
He's changing how we look at these people. It's as though being merciful is more important than affirming the doctrine of the Church.
And yet the message is blunt. The Church must become more merciful, says the Pope. If it doesn't, he says, it risks seeing its moral center collapse, as he puts it, like a house of cards.
Now, after he made those comments, understandably, some members of the Catholic Church were very, very upset about it. They felt that he is belittling something that they've been preaching about for quite some time now. So he did have an interview with the press, and he did walk back his comments significantly. He said that abortion is wrong. He doesn't agree with it. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And then he also said that he does want to also emphasize on helping the needy and focusing on wealth inequality, which I think is the best thing that the Catholic Church can do right now, especially when you look at the polls and you look at the number of people that are leaving the Catholic Church. They're losing favorability. So I think changing or pivoting their stance on those issues might be the right way to go. Ramon, first question goes to you. What are your thoughts on what's happening with Pope Francis right now? Do you really see him as a more liberal pope, especially when you think of other popes?
Well, one of the biggest impressions on the comments that he's made recently was this obsession with money and us idolizing money. It's a pretty direct criticism of capitalism. This is, capitalism has been criticized heavily by the Vatican for more than 100 years, so that's nothing new. But it also really kind of brought back some sort of images of liberation theology that was practiced by a lot of pastors in Latin America. And we have to remember that Pope Francis is the first non-European pope in almost 2,000 years. So the thinking of the Latin American church going public is a lot different than it would be in Europe. And also a lot of the new Catholics will probably be in the poorer countries of Latin America and in Africa, where you do have to take a look at their social problems before you look at making sure that they don't commit sins to get into heaven. So what it looks like right now is that this Pope is not so much focused on don't sin so that you can go to heaven. He's like, let's try to make mankind a little bit better by dealing with the problems that are here on earth right now.
So that sounds pretty good to me. I'm not religious, I'm agnostic, and one of the reasons why I'm not a religious is because I don't like the idea of an organized religion dictating the way other people live their lives. And also, I like scientific evidence, so that's another reason why. But Dave, I want you to jump in and tell me what you think. I mean, does this sound good enough for you to even consider supporting the Catholic Church?
Well, I think the funny part of this is what you alluded to earlier, which is it's really a fine line between being a pope and a politician, because he already had to hedge what he said.
Right.
He said something that sounded pretty great, right? And then immediately the hardcore people, so if he was a politician, his base got angry, and then he has to give a speech to explain, well, that's not exactly what I meant. So what's interesting about this, I think, is that there's a lot of parallels to the story we just did about Iran also, because do you take these people for their word? Even if they have a bad track record, like Iran and like the Catholic Church on gay issues and divorce and things of that nature, do you take them for their word when they want to change? For some reason, and I'm not even sure what my reasoning is, I am more inclined to go with the Pope on this. I think he's trying to do something good here, and yes, it is very easy to make fun of religion all the time, and I'm an equal opportunity offender when it comes to that. But it seems to me that he's doing something that is not easy, and he's seeing that things are changing, and we should try to grant him a little leash to see if that happens. Because otherwise we're just as intolerant as the people we're saying are intolerant all the time, right?
Axel, do you feel that the Pope has the ability to shift the emphasis in this religious institution? I mean, do you think that he has the ability to change the perception of what the Catholic Church should be focusing on?
I think that's the key word, perception. I think it's a matter of focus, and he's trying to shift the focus, because really dogma and, in general, the Bible can't be changed. Like Constitution, try to amend it, you have to go to, 2/3 votes or something. Here, the only one that can amend it is not even on earth. So, you really can't do much with that. So the shift is going to be on the perception and what he talks about. I think it's a positive step that he talks economic issues. I think that's, I don't think anyone out there can say that that's like a bad thing. But is he going to really shift the views of the church? I don't think that that's going to happen. I think it's just a matter of like trying to attract new audience per se in this new era of changed era per se.
So Ramon, I want to share my strategy with you. I love that I'm trying to be a religious strategist right now, and I want to see if you're buying into it. I think that if the Pope genuinely does want to change the perception of the Catholic Church, the best way to do so is to just not talk about abortion and not talk about gay rights. Every time you give a speech, you talk about wealth inequality, and then all of a sudden people start to forget about the other issues, or they forget to they forget to be so hateful when it comes to certain groups of people. Because when it comes to the gay community and when it comes to reproductive rights, I mean, the Catholic Church has been very fierce. And I'm being generous by using such a positive word, but you know what I mean.
Such a gay word.
That's true. I didn't even realize that, but that's true. I mean, do you think that would be a successful strategy for the Pope?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, you're relating to people in the modern world where, while a lot of people might not go to church still, a lot of people still believe in God, the Christian God, for some reason. So in a lot of ways, I think that this method of reaching out to the masses, which I think he's doing very honestly, is going to really maybe keep people in the church that were, kind of on the fence, who might not be, like you said, be skeptical of the science behind it, or might be critical of the church's past. That said, I agree with Axel that it would be very, very difficult to change the entire church doctrine in just the lifetime of this Pope himself, because a lot of the things that he preaches is totally contrary to what Benedict and even Pope John Paul II were preaching, to where they would say that a Pope shouldn't be political, and that we shouldn't be, or that we should be very strict about abortion and being anti-gay and using condoms, where mainstream Catholics are not so hard and fast on those rules.
Right, and I will say, just to end the segment, I grew up very religious. I grew up going to Sunday school every single Sunday until I was 19. And before I was agnostic, I mean, I had a great experience with religion, and my church taught me to love other people, to respect other people, to forgive other people. And I don't know when or how that emphasis switched to something different, something that I consider kind of hateful. But I do want to really let you guys know that there are good people out there that are religious, that want to use religion for good, and it's refreshing to see a Pope advocate for that. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little technology with the new iPhone. Welcome back to The Point. After talking about Iran and whether or not a journalist on Twitter is considered a journalist and all this really serious, heavy stuff, we're going to talk about the iPhone, okay? So the new iPhone has come out, the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 5C, and people predictably waited in line for 9 hours just to get it. We have a quick video showing you what exactly happened when it was released. Let's take a look.
No pre-orders for the new Apple 5S and 5C. Customers that wanted a phone had to be patient and wait their turn, standing on lines outside the Apple store on 5th Avenue in Midtown New York City, outside a Sprint store on the Upper East Side, and they lined up at this AT&T store as well. And that's just New York. Add to that China, Sydney, Japan. It was downright retro.
It brings back a lot of old memories from my old 3G Apple iPhone. I mean, to see that it's way above a lot of other phones ahead of its time is amazing, beautiful.
I've been waiting outside for 15 days, and I just love the experience. I love meeting new people. I love getting every single Apple product.
Oh, I want to get the golden one, but they're sold out of it, so I'm just here with my sister, and she's going to get the black one. But I'm pretty upset because, you know, I'm not getting one and she is.
I didn't want to believe that people actually waited in line for 15 days, which is why I thought, like, wow, they waited in line for 9 hours. So my intro was wrong. Some people waited more than 2 weeks to get that iPhone, which is insane. Aren't they supposed to be working? How do they even afford the new iPhone if they don't have a job? So I just don't get it. But whatever, let's talk about all the hubbub. Why are people so excited? Why are they so obsessed with Apple products? Because there is literally nothing that I would wait 2 weeks for in line. I would be miserable. So I like the thought of waiting in line for an iPhone is just crazy. Dave Rubin, you are addicted to your iPhone. Any second that you're not on camera, you have your nose buried in your iPhone. So did you wait in line for the new one, or?
For the record, that's a Twitter addiction, and iPhone is just giving me Twitter.
Okay.
So it's more of a tool of the trade. Well, in full disclosure, I have waited online at Apple stores several times, I think for the 3, the 4, and the 5, just for a couple hours to get it that day. But I think this is actually kind of funny. This is my phone and my case. And what color does this look to you?
It's gold.
Well, someone said to me the other day, "Oh, you got the gold iPhone," and I was like, "What? This is my old This is just because I have an old case that's dirty."
It's dirty.
And,
Oh my God!
Yeah, so this is my iPhone. This is a regular white iPhone. So really, what you could do, I got this for like $6. It's just a piece of plastic. You just get an old, dirty iPhone case, put it on your iPhone, and oh my God, he has the gold iPhone. So I would highly recommend. That's a little tip for the kids out there.
That is terrible.
Yeah, that's right.
Just everything that you said,
This is
including the
really-
waiting in line to get an iPhone. I'm judging you.
I need to start
and
putting
anyone
that on
else
the
who
floor
did
at the
it.
gym. Okay.
Oh, what are you guys using? Are you guys using iPhones?
Yeah, pretty much.
I am the lone BlackBerry user in the group.
Wow.
I don't know if you guys
What is
remember
that?
this from the old days.
What are these things here? These plastic little.
Yeah, I never got into the touchscreen, but so I kind of held on to my BlackBerry. And yeah, unlike those people in line, I have to work pretty hard for my money. So I think about whenever I have to spend $400 on an electronic.
Right. Okay, so one of the new features on the iPhone is this fingerprint identification. If you want to unlock your phone, you just use your thumbprint and it unlocks it. And there have been some privacy concerns over that because they're worried that hackers will have access to it. If hackers have access to your 4-digit PIN or whatever it is that you use to unlock your phone, well, you can always change it, but you can't change something like your thumbprint. Another thing to keep in mind is they can use that, hackers can use that to literally steal your identity. So it's a little problematic. But what do you guys think? Axel, do you feel that these fears are just, ridiculous paranoia, or is this something that we should really be concerned about?
I don't think it's paranoia. I mean, I think, after everything we listen about the NSA and about like everything that's going on and the collusion, particularly the corporate government collusion, that's the scariest part in this whole business. Right now they're saying, no, it's only on your phone, the fingerprint's only on your phone. Well, that's what they said about the information that was encrypted only on your phone, and that's what they said before that, and now they have access to everything. I just want to know what my NSA profile says right now. Would I like it? Would I share it? I would love to. But yeah, I think the paranoia is founded because of what we've seen. I don't know if we're going to see that trend continue. I think right now is the time to speak up.
Definitely. I mean, I had a friend show me her new iPhone, and she showed me the thumbprint thing, and it doesn't really go through anyone's mind. No one really thinks about what the ramifications of that could be, and it's kind of scary. I mean, with new technology comes new abuses, and no one really thinks about it until the abuses have, actually happened and people are reporting on it.
Well, in one of those NSA documents that was leaked, they go into in-depth about how they're not even going to have to really get information from us because we're just going to give them all the information.
That's exactly right.
And that's the thing, like with everything going on with the NSA, the idea that Apple in the midst of that came out with a new phone, and really the only difference, because everyone can get iOS 7 on their old phone, so the main difference is just that it's going to also take your fingerprint. I mean, that sounds made up. That actually sounds made up. We're going to tell you that we're stealing all your info, then we're going to hand you a new phone that'll get even more, and all you got to do is put your finger on it. I mean, it really sounds like science fiction.
People were waiting in line so long to just have their invasion or their privacy invaded even easier.
Willingly have their privacy invaded, definitely. What is up with this obsession with Apple products? Because, look, I have my Samsung Galaxy phone, and I love it. It's my favorite piece of technology. I always use it. I'm addicted to my phone just like Dave Rubin is, and I get made fun of for it all the time.
We had a lunch, no talking, the other day.
That's true. I was like, why do we need to communicate when I can just use my phone? But why is it that people don't have that same mania, that same craziness for Samsung products, but they do for Apple products? Why has Apple been so successful in their marketing?
Well, I do think the cult of personality around Apple is breaking without Steve Jobs. I definitely do sense that. Even in their commercials now, they have this great commercial where it's all about Cupertino and it's designed in California. And of course, what they don't tell you is that it's all made in China. And a lot of people are returning their Apple stuff. I have iPad and a MacBook and this thing, and all the chargers are all frayed at the corners, and things are breaking all the time. And I think it's starting to come around that it's not as great as we all think. There was this idea that it was like this clean, simple, smooth thing, and breaking technology all the time, like breaking out new technology. I mean. And it doesn't necessarily feel that way anymore. I'm in no rush to get the 5S. It seems like the same thing
Good for
that
you.
I have with my dirty iPhone.
I'm proud of you.
But the marketing is amazing still.
It is.
I think while the product is, crap to a certain extent, if you continue down that line, the marketing is still awesome. I mean, the fact, I heard that one of the Apple stores locally only had 12 golden phones. It's like the golden ticket in Willy Wonka. Everyone wants it, nobody can, go and get it. And it just drives up the price. They're selling on eBay for $1,500.
That's insane. What are you guys doing? It makes me so angry. Yeah. Keep in mind, 9 million people bought the iPhone, the new iPhone, by Monday. So that number is higher at this point. It's just incredible. I mean, good for Apple if they have figured out the marketing strategy, but bad on the American people for falling for it and putting themselves through hell for 2 weeks just to get their hands on it.
Yeah, they do have a marketing strategy. It looks like the other companies are starting to catch up in that department. But at the end of the day, Axel said some of the products are crappy, but everybody is still using them. Everybody is overpaying for them. And you might think it's crappy, but it's really an industry standard in the business that we're in. Everybody's using a Max. I'm using a BlackBerry, but I hate it because it's freezing all the time. I wish I could have an iPhone.
Yeah.
And they developed also a business strategy to where, if you want to get accessories or any add-ons, you have to go to the Apple store. If you have a PC, you can kind of get pieces for that for anywhere. So it's a business model and a marketing model that's been very, very successful. But I think other companies are catching up on the marketing. And with Steve Jobs gone, it's really going to be a big question whether they're going to be able to innovate.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they've also tricked you into once you buy one of their things, you end up buying other things. Because, for example, like Apple TV, which I just got a couple months ago, now I can mirror my phone to my television or send my iTunes to my television, and simple little things, or the iPad to the TV or the computer to the TV or whatever. So once you get one, then you're like, oh, well, I can also do this, but I can only do it with another one of their things. So they really have figured out how to keep you in their little ecosystem.
All right, this is the point where I beg you guys to comment. Tell us what you think about the show. We love hearing your feedback. And also subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. We love new subscribers. We want a bigger audience. I mean, who doesn't? But we also like to hear your feedback, so make sure to comment. Axel Caballero, please tell the audience where they can learn more about your work.
Yes, definitely. They can check it out at mycuentame.org, and I'm actually going to plug the twitter.com/Axel W. Caballero.
Awesome. Ramon Galindo.
You can see my work at rt.com/USA. You can also find me on Twitter at @RamonGalindo_RT.
My show is The Rubin Report right here on the Young Turks Network, youtube.com/Rubin Report, and I'm on Twitter at Rubin Report, whether Dianne Feinstein likes it or not.
And I'm Ana Kasparian. You guys can watch me Monday through Friday on the Young Turks at youtube.com/TYT. We go live from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, so make sure you guys check us out or become a member. You guys can check out our archives whenever the hell you want. I'll see you guys next week.